Hi, everyone. Welcome and good morning. Welcome. We're so excited to have you here at Magic in the Everyday, Fantasy and Folklore in the Diaspora. Today we have Leslye, Penelope, Veronica Henry, Eden Royce, and Djeli Clark. I am Isis Asare, CEO and founder of Sister Sci-Fi. So I'll stop here and let everyone introduce yourself. Leslye, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm Leslye, and I'm a writer of fantasy and paranormal romance. My latest book is The Monsters We Defy, which is a 1925 fantasy heist that takes place in Washington, D.C. And I love incorporating magic and folklore into my books. I invoked magic this week through trying to find inspiration and trying to fill the well through reading poetry. And I think that's a great way to just invoke art and beauty in the world. So thanks.
I love it. I love it. I love that way of invoking magic. Veronica, would you like to go next in terms of introduction?
Absolutely. Hi, I am Veronica G. Henry. I'm an author of speculative fiction. My most recent, The Foreign Exchange, will be released on the 28th in 2 days. Yay. Let's see, my other two releases, Bacchanal and The Quarter Storm, which is the first book in the Mambo Reina series, are also out there. This week, I invoked magic similar to Leslye. I was at a point where I needed some inspiration, where I needed a pick-me-up of the most dire circumstances ever. So I did that by reading, by taking a step back, invoking, using a bath with salts and things like that. So that is me.
Yay. What did you read?
I was reading some work by Amy Tan and also Silver Sparrow by Tayari, I think, Jones.
Nice. Awesome. Eden, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Eden Royce. Pronouns are she, her, or if you are another Gullah Geechee person like me, you can use E as well. I am a writer of speculative fiction, more specifically Southern Gothic, dark fantasy, and sometimes a little bit of horror as well. My next release is called Conjure Island, which will be out on June 27th. My first novel, which is my debut of 2021, is Root Magic, which is a winner of the Ignite and Mythopoeic Fantasy Awards, and is a book of my heart, I think is the title that people usually give those books. And it is fantasy and folklore of the part of the world that I grew up in. And as far as invoking magic this week, that would be having a talk with my mother, who loves to share stories, who loves to reminisce, and talking with her sort of across the lines and across the pond is always invoking that sort of portal of magic for me.
Yeah, I love that. And I just want to bring in the chat, Eden. Mel says, I love root magic so much. So I just want to bring that. Djeli, do you want to go next?
Hi, everyone. Sure. My name is Djeli Clark. I'm a writer of speculative fiction. My works include, well, this child, my novella Ring Shout, as well as works in what's known as the Dead Djinn series, is what they call it. My next upcoming work is going to be in middle grade, and it's a book called The Beanie Song, and it's going to be out in July. My pronouns are he and him, and how I evoked magic this week, I suppose, was in watching videos of Carnival, because I haven't been to Carnival in a long time, and I have what is known in Trinidad as tabanca, where you basically miss something and yearn for something that you had to leave behind. So I watched a lot of Carnival videos this week.
Yay, awesome. I love it. And thank you for the introductions. I'm so happy. I'm so happy for this panel and discussion and have us all here together. So if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A section. I'll bring that into the conversation with these amazing, talented authors. While the viewers and participants load in your questions and questions come up, I have some questions prepared. So I'll start with the basics. How are we defining magic in the everyday, in our works as authors? How do you define magic and how do you define speculative fiction? And whoever wants to go first can go first.
I'll take a stab at starting, kicking things off here. I define magic, and mind you, my definition of magic changes, depending on what's going on in the world, what's going on in my own life. But I define it as anything that isn't explained through traditional means. And it could be, something as small as a coincidence, something that happened that you're like, that's too much of a coincidence to be happenstance. Or it could be something, like ancestor veneration, things like that. How I define speculative fiction, again, is kind of along the same lines. And I know that definition is changing and growing as the industry grows along with it. But spec fic for me is anything that involves telling a story, perhaps with an element of the unexplained or magical, but set in a realistic setting, realistic environment, where magic isn't necessarily the focus, but it's a part of the everyday life. Perhaps it's a special ability of a character, or it's in a world where, again, non-traditional religious elements may be present, things like ghosts, etc. So that's kind of my definition of both of those. How I use them in my work was through like the Mambo Reina series. The main character is a voodoo priestess. So that's kind of the definition of both spec fic and magic, mixed in. And in Bacchanal, it invoked probably a lot of traditional African mythology and folklore.
I love that. And for me, that definition of speculative fiction was very insightful because it makes it something separate from both science fiction and fantasy. And I think historically I've used speculative fiction as an umbrella term for a lot of different things. Other definitions of magic and speculative fiction?
I think that magic is like anything that has power to create something in the world that can't be created any other way. So, you can divide it from technology and from any other type of creation to sort of invoke your will on a situation or the world, other people, objects. So it's sort of like making your desires reality by some means that is not technically possible in the world that we understand it. And there's so much about it that's mysterious. It's like whenever you're including the mysterious things that can't be explained any other way. And so speculative fiction, I also have always understood it to be like an umbrella term for anything that includes these things that we don't understand. So you have underneath it different ways of speculating about what if this could happen. What if, whether it's, the fantastical and people had powers or lived in a world where, these phenomena were real, things that we don't understand, or it can be what if we live in a world where the AI take over and it's a technology-based speculation about what could possibly happen, whether it actually could happen and is happening and people have predicted it in the past, or maybe it couldn't happen or it doesn't happen in a way that we can articulate or find reasons for. So whenever you're asking what if in a way that you don't quite know the answer to, I think that is speculative fiction.
I like that. And I like the definition of magic, like creating or invoking your will and desire and putting it into the universe, particularly like, I don't know, your thoughts is like Black writers and most of us women writers, right, or women creators in a world that likes to take away or denigrate or not acknowledge our will and our desires. That feels really powerful. Eden, Djeli, your thoughts on definitions on magic and speculative fiction?
I suppose I'll go. I resonate a lot with what Leslye said as far as it's realizing that we have an impact to change, manipulate, and influence the world around us, whether that's in a way that's conventionally understood or not. I think that having a lot of faith and belief that what you do in the world and how you move through the world can affect those around you and affect the outcome of what you would desire to see happen in your life and in the world that's a magic that a lot of us feel like we don't have. But I think it's something that's an incredibly powerful thing. And it's something that isn't always tangible, but it's something that you can recognize in others and recognize in other parts of the world. And if there's something that is drawing you to a person or to a place or something that you may not be able to put your finger on and explain why, that's a magic in and of itself, to be connected or have a feeling of being pulled towards something or pulled or led in a certain direction and not being able to necessarily explain why that is. As far as what speculative fiction is, I always saw it as an umbrella term that basically meant not literary fiction. But I think to make it a broader definition, it is fiction that builds itself on imagination, not necessarily chronicling things that can happen and the way that people do react and the things that we can observe in our world. It's being able to be a creative and imagine something different than what you've experienced.
That what if, yeah, okay.
Oh, it's my turn. I don't really have much to add. I think those are pretty great definitions. They're really expansive. I mean, when I think of magic, I just think of anything beyond the mundane world. Anything that, as I think as people have said, isn't explained or what have you. And as far as speculative fiction, yeah, I use the term probably as well as a umbrella term for anything, whether it's horror, science fiction, or whatever. I mostly use it as a genre term, but I like Veronica's mention of it, especially in terms of this panel and dealing with ideas of magic.
Yeah. So for the rest of the questions, I know for the introductions in this last question, it was very much each of us goes, which is great. And we can continue to do that, but also feel free to respond to other people's thoughts to make this more engaging. And I'll continue to bring in comments in the chat. Clarence Young says, magic is a child in a tiara creating joy. So we love those images. Hopefully she continues to pop in and says hi. The next question is, what diaspora magical systems influence your work? So Eden Royce, you talk about the themes in roots magic. What are other diaspora and magic systems influence your work?
Well, I grew up in a hoodoo culture, so a lot of hoodoo influences my work. I would say that there are a lot of ties between hoodoo, root work, whatever term you'd like to call it, and voodoo culture and traditions. A lot of those African traditional religions have similar origins, have similar aspects to them. As far as incorporating others, it's really sort of, reading widely and seeing where connections lie. I have woven in European magic systems to my work, looking at some of the similarities between African traditional religions and some Asian traditional religions as well appear in my work.
If I could add on to that, one of the things that Eden mentioned was the West African traditions. And that's where I started my research for actually all of my work. And out of that research, I discovered how those traditional religions kind of traveled across the pond with us. And what you might see in the South, I wasn't born in the South, but my family definitely was from South Carolina and spent a lot of time there. But what you see is elements of that West African tradition have morphed into what you might find today in voodoo, what you might find today in hoodoo, conjure, and those types of things. And those elements are all included, or things that I included in my work because I found them fascinating. I love the empowerment that I got from understanding the religion and the traditions that we had culturally before we were brought to this country. And again, and I like to invoke that in my work as best that I can, not being a practitioner always, but being a conscious observer and someone who wants to pay respect to those traditions and bring them into a better light than what we might see in more traditional media.
I definitely saw that when I experienced Bacchanal, so yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly the same for me, like researching West African traditions and what the enslaved people brought over here and wherever they ended up and changed and added to Native American traditions and then the Christian traditions that were sort of forced on them, and how everything melded and changed, and you can see the same roots. And so for me in my work, Monsters We Defy, and then the next actual 2 books that I'm working on is about taking that and imagining it in different ways. Like, I don't want to necessarily write about one specific tradition, but I'm sort of creating the idea of these characters that I have done the same thing and have morphed, West African religious traditions in a different way that has the same roots as voodoo and hoodoo, conjure, things that, you grow up hearing about, growing up Black in America, and also just books that we probably all read from Black authors, like the seminal Black authors who were dealing in these traditions as well. And everyone has their own take on it because they're different wherever they show up, different regionally. And through the filter of our imagination, they come out a little bit differently. But seeing those connections, seeing what Black people across the diaspora have done with the same root material is really fascinating. And then trying to figure out how you can portray that and make it into something new and different in your work is always really a fascinating endeavor.
Yeah, I think my own work definitely pulls at times on African diaspora, folklore, religion, magic, and sometimes we collapse those terms. And I sometimes try to be careful in using terms like folklore and magic for people who are, like, for instance, Ifa, or religions that are actually things that people actually practice, right? But it's sometimes there's a slippage in those terms, and I don't have a good solution at times on how to figure that out in speaking to a Western audience. But I certainly draw on those things for my work, West African as well as Central African, as well as all those things that were created, I think, as everyone has said, in the between, right? The things that were created here within the larger confines of the Western world through the transatlantic slave trade, understanding that those traditions did not remain static, but they changed, and that we created a lot of things right here, right? Things that would not have been immediately recognizable in parts of West and Central Africa. So I pull on all of those, but sometimes it depends on the work I'm doing. Because if I'm doing work that is specifically rooted in the experience of those persons in the diaspora, those of us in the diaspora, then that's what I'm pulling on. If I'm writing a secondary world fantasy, like the work I'm doing now that's in West or Central Africa, I'm probably going to be much more focused on those things that are indigenous to Africa, though I don't mind pulling in the things that we created here in there as well, because it's fantasy and I can do what I want. And so, for instance, I have stories that are definitively West and Central Africa, but I pull in Caribbean folklore into it because, again, it's my story and I can do what I want. And then, of course, I'm also influenced by those things that are not specifically of the diaspora, West and Central Africa. And my works may pull on, I've had stories where I talk about Armenian folklore or what have you. And so sometimes I like drawing on the larger world of folklore and mythology that I was exposed to. I mean, I grew up reading, probably like a lot of people, a ton of Greek mythology. Though I haven't thrown a lot of Greek mythology in there, I can't say it doesn't at times influence how I may even interpret certain things. And so, I draw on all of those. I was going to say, as people were talking, people want a great book on this. It's a bit academic, but there's a work called Sorcery in the Black Atlantic. I mean, everybody's ever heard of it. It is an edited volume, and it basically talks about the various forms of magic systems and so forth that were created throughout the Black Atlantic due to the mass migration of the transatlantic slave trade.
Ooh, that sounds fascinating. I'm gonna bring in one of the Q&A questions. And I have a follow-up question about source that ties to another question I have. So Alex B. Padu asks, how does Afrofuturism relate to speculative fiction, and what genres best portray Afrofuturism? And so that's a question I'll ask to all of y'all.
I think that Afrofuturism is broad. I've seen it applied to a lot of different things, and I guess it depends on who's talking about it. Like the marketplace will try to attach Afrofuturism to basically anything Black and speculative. That's been what I've seen. So it can be, a little bit difficult to answer. I think of Afrofuturism traditionally as, portraying us in the present, but in the future, as it says, and sort of imagining like a Black future, imagining Black people persisting and achieving and thriving, beyond where we've been. And so I always think of that. Science fiction and fantasy can do that. I think any genre can do that. But if that's the question, like you can infuse Afrofuturism into other things. And I don't know if there's a pure way to do it. I tend to shy away from sort of the marketing way of doing it, but those are just my initial thoughts.
If I could add to what Leslye said, she kind of hit it on the nail for me. It seems that the industry is applying that term to everything Black and speculative. And in my experience, I think what I see as Afrofuturism is looking at, if you look at some of the texts and the stuff that I grew up reading, right? I've read Asimov and all of those golden era sci-fi and fantasy books, but I didn't necessarily see myself in those books. I understood that I liked this world. I understood that I liked the idea of a future that might look different than what the present did. But again, not seeing the presence of African-American or people of the African diaspora in those settings, I think led to what you see now is just a flood of material that's acknowledging that we are going to be part of that history, that we are creating that history today. And so Afrofuturism to me means picturing us in fantastical settings, future settings, where we're right along with everyone else, or in fact, we're driving, that story. But that's kind of the way that I interpret it.
I like that definition. Eden, Djeli, any additions to that?
Yeah. Yes. Hi. Say hi. This is Nia. So I think that I really liked what's been said, especially the idea of the marketing, because Afrofuturism can be this really fraught term because of the way it's used. I mean, I've seen, as I once joked, I said I could be telling someone I'm writing a story on ancient Africa and they have dinosaurs and sorcery, and somebody will say, "Aha, Afrofuturism." I was like, how? But I see that people use the term, and I'm glad you said it for marketing because I think that's it. But I also think people just don't know how to engage work that is not what they understand, and so like I've heard some people will compare something I did to Octavia Butler's work, and I said I love Octavia Butler's work, but how? Explain. Keep going. Tell me how my work is, and people are sometimes looking for something to attach it to, and so. Troy L. Wiggins, the writer, had a site called Afro Fantasy. And I said, that's like a term that people don't like to use. It bothers them, even if we're doing a lot of fantasy and magic. And so, yes, Afrofuturism becomes attached to it. Now, I think you can do Afrofuturism and include magic, as everyone has said. You can still be doing something futuristic. I think Nizzy Shawl has coined the term retrofuturism for if you're doing steampunk or something of the sort, which tends to always bring in some magic. And so I think there are different ways that Afrofuturism can definitely connect to magic. But I know I hate to say this, but we might need another term beyond simply Afrofuturism to discuss many of the various different things that we're doing.
Okay, I'm here for that.
That's the question.
So Eden, as we close it out, what are your thoughts on the original question? And if you had to coin another term, what would it be? And you could be like, I don't have that right now.
I was going to say coining a new term. Wow. I will start with my thoughts on Afrofuturism. They're very similar to Djeli's, to be honest. Of Afrofuturism is a buzzword that makes people feel good. I've read something that's considered Afrofuturism, or these are, you're able to list 10 books of Afrofuturism for your article or something. but it's in a lot of ways a very limiting term, because it brings up certain connotations of futurism equals science fiction in a lot of people's minds and in a lot of readers' minds. And the way that I see going forward, because historically so much has been either taken from Black people, hidden, attributed to other people, in a way, writing about historical events and reworking those to show the reality of our presence in history and our impact and our influence in history and pulling that forward is also a way of reimagining the history of the real world and how Black people had to exist as a step below in some ways, as far as our innovations and our inventions and how we've impacted the world. So even people who write about historical settings and historical people are reimagining the future, because they're giving readers now, whether they're young readers or older readers, something to realize and cling on to of, we've been here for years, we've been doing this for years, we've been influential for years. So taking that idea of, it's almost a Sankofa type idea of going back in time to take out the important things and bring those things forward is a way of propelling us forward as creatives, as people. And what's the right term for that? I really couldn't say. But I think that sometimes compartmentalizing things doesn't always do us justice. So maybe it's a Sankofaism, a way of showing that we are here, we have been here, and we take what parts from the world around us and from our own histories and use them in the way that we need to in order to continue and thrive.
I love it. I love that you brought in the tradition of Sankofa. I'm here for Sankofaism or Sankofa fiction. Like, I'm here for all the things. Andrew, we'll answer your question. I have a section for audience questions. Clarence Young asks, as authors, and this goes back to our earlier conversation of how we define magic, as writers of diaspora traditions, do we tend to see magic in our fiction with a less colonial magic is something to be controlled mindset and more of magic as a collaborative energy?
I would definitely agree with that. I was, I like thinking about magic systems, but I think the types of magic we've been talking about don't lend themselves to sort of the traditional, there's these costs and you have to sort of decide, why don't these people take over the world? There's questions that, like world building questions, that often get thrown around when you're developing magic systems. And in working on magic systems based on Black traditions, either religious or folkloric, oftentimes I'm looking at these questions, I'm like, well, they don't necessarily apply and in the same way. So I was someone came to me with a project concerning a Black magic system, and they had a synopsis written up, and people were doing all of this sort of battle magic with something similar to voodoo. And it was just kind of like, what do you know about this? And how does this make sense? How are you trying to apply these other rules to something that, the way that it was done did not make any sense. And I think that it doesn't lend itself to that, because if you look at where things came from, it's collaborative, it's earth-based, it's community-based. You're looking at Black community in a different way, and how that's why I said it's creating something that doesn't exist. It's kind of invoking your will. It's oftentimes invoking the ancestors to support you in something. And it's very different than, maybe pointing a wand at something and making it explode. So we do have to have more expansive views of magic and what it does and how we describe it and the rules about it, I think.
I love that. I just want to bring in Herbert's comment. I'm so sad that I was late. but this is one of the panels that I was most excited about. So just Leslye, Veronica, Eden, Djeli, y'all are making somebody's Sunday morning by being here. So I just wanted to bring that in. Okay, and thank you. We have 20 minutes left. So the next question, Djeli, you brought up sorcery in the Black Atlantic. So my question is, how do you conduct research on magical systems on the African diaspora? What advice would you give your fellow writers?
Do a lot of reading. Do a lot of reading. There's a lot of work that's been written on this. There's a lot of work that's been collected. There are a lot of oral testimonies that people can give you. So I would suggest doing a lot of reading and then doing a lot of talking. You can find a lot of people who are practitioners or people who are involved in these kinds of things, and they can give you some great information, right? And so, yeah, I mean, you have to do the research or it's going to seem a little off. I think, as Leslye was saying, if you've just, slapped it onto like a Harry Potter model, it's going to be kind of off. And there's a way you can do that. It just has to make sense. Otherwise, yeah, it's going to seem a bit off. So I would suggest there's research is just what you got to do. No way around it. I don't want to turn this into a research panel, but sorry, no way around it.
If I could add on to that, Djeli's right. One of the things that made the most difference for me is actually talking to practitioners. And certainly there's a lot of reading you have to do. And frankly, that's one of the most fun parts of being an author, right? You get to actually read things that you're curious about, things that you're interested in. But you do have to couple that, in my experience, you couple that with talking to people who are experts in the field. That could be academics, that could be historians, that could be real practitioners. But I think by doing so, you lend a sense of truth, of validation, I think, to your work that you won't get for just kind of, using your imagination. And I think that's a bit of a tactic that I think some writers may think is that, okay, this is fantasy, I'm just making this up. So I'm going to pluck this element and I'm going to toss it onto my book and I'm just going to roll with it. Not when you're talking about traditional, religions, traditions, that sort of thing. Then you have a responsibility to do the extra work to make sure that you're lending that truth that you need to your work.
I love that.
I just want to add really quickly, I don't want people to think that this means I'm saying that you're looking for some authentic truth, right? That it has to be, quote unquote, that word authentic. You're imagining. You're going to change things. I have a story, I can't remember the name of it right now, it's something to do with Martians, but where in this world, magic has come in and it's kind of overthrown the world order as we know it. And so guess what? The rules around Voodoo have, for instance, have changed, right? And I knew in doing that, there might be some Voodoo practitioners who will be like, hey, what are you doing? Because I've shifted things around here. And I decided I'll take that weight, right? If people are upset, then I'll take that weight. But I still try to do it respectful. I still try to understand it, but I made changes because I'm imagining here. And so I don't want anyone to think that we're saying that when you do this, it has to follow the exact rules. You'll find that exactness is going to be off anyway, because people are going to tell you different things. And so please open up your imagination. Just, be aware of what you're doing. And again, approach it, I think, is Veronica and Leslye, I think, are trying to say, with some kind of empathy.
Djeli, can I say that the fact you can't remember the title of your short story is so incredibly relatable to me? I think it's, in case anybody wants to read this wonderful story, I think it's called If Martians Have Magic. And I think it was with Uncanny. And it is a phenomenal story if you would like to go read it. I kind of relate this situation to the way people love to use the phrase of, in order to break the rules, you have to first learn the rules. And I think that there's a way that when you read a story and you read a finished work, you can see where the writer has done their work. Whether they take things in a different direction or reimagine things or give a reason why things are different to the way that the reference material says they might be. that comes through the work, someone who's paid attention and done the research and done the legwork, as opposed to someone who feels like there's a template for magical stories to follow. So don't ever feel like, you have to necessarily stick to what the research says, but the fact that you have done the research and done the reading or the listening or the communicating, I think your end reader will thank you for it.
Agreed. Naja asked, does anyone in the chat have recommended reading lists? So we'll pause there and go around, and all authors, please tell your titles, because those are the books I would recommend. I would start with Leslie's Penelope's The Monsters We Defy. You saw that I read it and I dog tagged it and all that kind of good stuff. So let us know your work, because that's our recommended reading list. Leslie, we'll start with you. Say it again, because I know we said it before, but the question came up. So I just want to make sure people have the titles for real.
Well, yes, as Isis so lovely said, The Monsters We Defy is my latest book. I also have a completed epic fantasy series called The Earthsinger Chronicles, if you're a fan of Second World fantasy. 4 books and 3 novellas, and it's all complete.
Veronica, do you want to go next?
Yep. Let's see, my debut, Bacchanal. If you like carnivals and magic and traveling along the American South, and historical fiction, that is for you. My second book, The Quarter Storm, is the start of the Mambo Reina series. That features a voodoo priestess who lives in New Orleans and leaves her practice temporarily to embark on a career as amateur sleuth solving a murder. The second in the series, The Foreign Exchange, drops on Tuesday. Oh, and I might also mention a short story I did in a collection with fabulous group of authors. The story is called, actually the collection is called Into the Shadow, and my story is called The Candles Are Burning. It incorporates folklore from Asian tradition, American South, and really proud of that.
Okay. He's not calling you.
Okay.
That's how you are on my screen.
Absolutely. My debut novel is Root Magic, which is a middle grade Southern Gothic about twins learning root work in the 1960s South Carolina in order to improve the world around them and what they encounter once the world of root work opens up to them. My second middle grade novel is due out in June of this year, called Conjure Island. And that's a contemporary novel about a girl who didn't grow up with a lot of roots, who ends up getting sent to her great grandmother in South Carolina for the summer to find out that she runs a school for conjure magic and what that means for her to learn about not only the magic, but about her history. And for adult readers, not that adults can't read middle grade as well, I have a collection of short stories based on fictionalizations of Gullah Geechee folklore coming out from Broken Eye Books later this year. I believe it's May, called Who Lost I Found. So some of them reprints, some of them new. So both of those will be out later this year.
That sounds fantastic. And Djeli, will end with you.
Sure. As you see, I'll never get the short stories. Remember those. And so I tried to turn around and get books from my library, see what I could find. There's The Black God's Drums, which I think was my first novella. It is a retrofuturism, steampunk, alternate New Orleans that brings in voodoo and voodoo within the story. Let's see. There is Ring Shout. This one's in Spanish, but they have these in English. Ring Shout, which came out, I think, in 2020. Which, yes, that's it. Yes, you see it. It's Ring Shout. Thank you. You took it. Which is basically a bit of magic, Gullah folklore and what have you, that Eden was helped me out in that work itself. So thank you. you should always have people you can turn around and ask questions to. And then there is the Dead Jinn world, which is another one that's made of magic and retrofuturism, that is set in a 1912 Egypt, but brings in magic from all over. And this was the novel. I don't have the other books, A Master of Jinn. And the upcoming book, which doesn't have a cover yet, at least that they're printing, is called The Beanie Song. And again, that's a secondary fantasy world story that's going to have a lot of magic and magical creatures and different things like that.
Yay. I love that. Just a random fun fact, if you are in the Pacific Northwest, Ring Shout is stocked in the Sister Sci-Fi book vending machine in the mixed copy and community. So going to the audience questions, because there are a lot, and we have 10 minutes. These are more advice for works that they're writing on. We'll start with Andrew Taylor, or Tanner. Can you speak to the pressure when writing a so-called Black story, meaning for some reason when the characters are Black and it's a Black, okay, to be inclusive of non-Black characters? For context, I'm writing a fantasy novel that features South African mythology based on the Fish Out of Water Portal series, and I was told I should add non-Black characters to make it more open. I got around this by exploring albinism and mixed race identity, but it was born from frustration initially.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump into that one. Yeah, no. I remember I got tagged with this a while back when someone was doing some fantasy. They're like, well, if it's just African fantasy, then it's not diverse. And I just stared at them till they stopped talking. I mean, everyone's going to have to do what they have to do in order to get something published. I understand that, but I feel it's wrong-headed that we're going to be asked to include non-Black characters. If I want to do so, I'll do so. I've done so before, but I don't think that should be a focus. I think the whole point here often is that we have been undervalued in this. We've been underrepresented. It seems perverse to be asking us to, carry the burden of making our work diverse for it to be quote unquote more realistic. This sounds too much like what Eddie Murphy had to go through with Boomerang, and everybody knows the story of Boomerang, right? That his Boomerang was considered by the critics to be unrealistic because it was an all-Black company, all right? And he was being asked to bring in whites and so forth, and he refused, and we know how that went. We loved it. The white critics did not. All this to say, I mean, I get it. You're going to have to do what you have to do to sell to the market or what have you. But I say in the end, my opinion is to be true to yourself. If you know that this is what you want, and bringing these other characters and other things, as you said, simply makes it a boring chore and it feels untrue to you, then my thing is not to do it.
I can only add to that by saying everything that Djeli said.
Yes.
And
Enough
also,
said.
no one ever asks, I don't know who this person is who's telling you this.
Mhm.
Like, I have a book. No, there's no white characters in The Monsters We Defy. No, I don't think any white people have any speaking parts in that book. So there's plenty of cases where you'll get published without it. So if it's an editor or an agent, maybe you need to find someone else, or if it's just another critique partner. But there's plenty of examples of published books where that's not the case. So yeah, but they said be true to yourself.
Yes.
Absolutely. I can only agree with that. I had a lot of pushback with Root Magic because I was told that we don't do dialect, full stop, especially not for middle grade. And they wanted me to strip all of it from the book. And there's a fear sometimes, especially when you're starting out, maybe as a new author, of nobody's going to like this, or I'm not going to get another chance, or everybody's going to feel the same way and I'll have to do it whether, or not I want to. But realize that you're not alone in having to fight those fights. And like Djeli said, it's what's true to you, what makes it feel like the right work and what you're putting your name on. And you sometimes just have to sort of hold your breath and go, no, sorry, I'm not going to do it. It'll be okay.
Great advice. Whitney J says, it's like when the reporter asked Toni Morrison if she would ever go, quote unquote, mainstream. So thank you for those responses. Andrew, thank you for that question. It was great. I'll ask one more question. Okay, we'll ask one more question from the audience, and then we'll go into this or that questions because we have 4 minutes. I think we can do both if that's what the universe wills. So Herbert says, hello, I'm a fantasy writer who is using magic systems from all across the globe in his novel, but the main protagonist of my novel is a Haitian Black woman who uses voodoo. I want more African and Black magic systems, but don't know enough about them. What are other African magic systems are there, and where can I read on them? Let me know if that question made sense or I needed to summarize.
Since we don't have too much time, so I'll jump in here. There's lots. There's tons. It's a really big continent. There's so much magic systems to pull from. Even if you're talking about like Haitian voodoo, that is probably, I mean, you're really talking about a religion that grows up in Haiti, that it's a synthetic religion. So it's bringing up West African as well as Central African and various different cultures, and it's bringing in as well ideas of Catholicism and other things. And so, yeah, there are a lot of magic systems simply in the diaspora itself in various places. We've talked about hoodoo, conjure, obia. We can talk about different religious systems, Santeria, Candomblé, all these others. Plus, when you hit the continent of Africa, I mean, it's unending. And I know I don't have a book in my mind right now, but there are great books on African cosmology, African religious beliefs. There are a lot of anthropological books. I know you want Molly of Denali. I'll get that in a second. There's just like a lot of different works. Again, I can't think of one, but really it's as easy, I'm not being flippant here, as Googling up African cosmology or African belief systems, and you'll find a lot.
There's one thing I can add to that. Like Djeli said, there's just a ton of resources out there that are Google away. But one of the things that was a big help for me and just trying to kind of compartmentalize that was just reaching out to a local research librarian. They are great resources that I think a lot of people may not know about. But if you give them your inquiry, what you're looking for, and kind of, give them just kind of the areas that you're looking to research, they can probably recommend a list of articles, journals, books, resources, and that's kind of a good place for people to start if you don't know exactly where you want to start.
Awesome. That's great advice. Resource librarians, which I wouldn't have thought of. Any other quick advice for Herbert?
My other advice for Herbert, read authors like you see here who are already doing it. And you'll get a lot of different versions of people doing it. I'm sure Isis can give you a full book list of various Black authors who've been doing it for quite a long time. And so, yeah, there's a lot of people. I think this is important because I think when I first started writing, the internet was not that big a thing then, that much older. And so there was a way where I thought when I was doing that, what I'm doing is brand new. And then I find out, all these other people have been doing it. There's a guy named Charles Saunders. He's been doing African fantasy since the 1970s, right? And so it's good to know the work that's already been done by authors. And so you get an idea for the genre, and you get to see, if you're going to be part of that genre, what's come before you and where it's going, right? I think it's just great to know that, so you can understand where you're going to fit in and what you're going to contribute to this dynamic world.
Yay. We got an additional 5 minutes. Thank you, the Virtuous Con, powers that be. So one person is going to answer this this question by Clarence Young, and then we're going to go into this or that, and y'all can decide who the person is. Has there been a time when you had to convince an editor that everyday magic was actual magic, since lots of editors remain in the wand is the shotgun mode and want sparks and explosions? Thank you for that question, Clarence.
I haven't, but I've had all Black editors, so I haven't experienced that.
Same here. I think I just got lucky. I have not had to fight for any of that.
Okay, so Clarence, keep pushing. There's an editor out there that will get that everyday magic is a real thing. Okay, 4 minutes, and we have 3 this or that questions, and if we get through them, there's a question by an anonymous attendee that we might swing. No, I think we'll have to close. There's a follow-up question. Herbert asked what publishers y'all are working on, but you can Google and see which publishers publish each of the author's books. So the first this or that, hoodoo or voodoo? And this or that works. It's a rapid fire response to what you prefer. And once you give your answer, you can give a bit more context. And so the first one is hoodoo or voodoo?
I'll just jump in and go with hoodoo, just because I know a little bit more about it. And my grandparents being from the South, no one was a practitioner, but there are always little nuggets that sort of work their way into their stories and conversations. And so that's just been my experience.
Awesome. Other thoughts and responses?
I guess I tend to think of hoodoo or conjure or obia and many of these others as kind of the mystical magic aspect sometimes of the religions. And in many cases, especially in the diaspora, where I mean, we talk a lot about Africans, of course, bringing over those religions, but there's so many things that you have to bring. Thank you. There's so many things that you have to bring over for a religion, right? There are priests and institutions and shrines, and we have to think of these enslaved Africans at times. Not everyone is able to bring all this over, right? Not everyone. So what you have at times is people bringing over the aspects of like what in certain parts of West Africa might be juju or these other things, which are sometimes the practicing things that have to do with botanicals and magic systems and so forth. And so I see a lot of that. And then there are, I guess though there's slippage there, I tend to also look at those who have the religions where you have fully formed gods and, really full larger belief systems, often based on pantheons and hierarchies. And so the two can work together, but I don't like to put them in opposition. But I tend to see like obia who doing these things existing on this one in its own realm, apart from the religions themselves, though they of course connect at times.
Yeah, great response. I do a lot of this or that where people are like, you can't make that a choice. Veronica, Eden, thoughts on voodoo versus hoodoo?
I'll just say, again, with my family being from South Carolina, there are some things that, you grew up with, but I'm going to go with voodoo because my books are focused in that space. That's where I've done a ton of research. And to Djeli's point, there's just an entire pantheon that goes along with that, the gods, the goddesses, the traditions, ceremonies, rituals, all that. So that's where I'm going to toss my hat.
Yay.
I personally don't want to choose. I'm from a hoodoo background, but because of the research I've done, there are such deep links and connections, things people brought forward for certain reasons and not for others. So I wouldn't necessarily want to choose one over the other because I think that they have sort of inextricable links in a lot of ways.
That is a brilliant response. There are also lots of brilliant response in the chat. So thank you for that. This would be my last question. I had one other one, but Marie Laveau or Tituba? Give me something. I'm really excited about this.
I have them both.
We're going to say both.
You're asking us to choose things,
and we can't possibly choose.
We don't want to isolate ourselves this way. We don't want to have this separation. We want to have everything available to us.
And that's fair. I mean, I like this or that because the discord and the conversation and so forth. And sometimes I do make them like, oh, why would you choose between one or the other? So that is fair. I appreciate that feedback. So for everyone, first, let me thank Virtuous Con, founded by a Black woman in the height of the pandemic to bring together creators and lovers of Black speculative fiction. I'm so appreciative of the space, as somebody who works in the space and somebody who just loves the space. Leslye, Veronica, Eden, Djeli, I want to thank you for one, your craft and your creativity and your gift and sharing that in the world in general, but particularly spending this hour this Sunday with us and diving deeper into your work and sharing advice. And yeah, the chat is also saying the same thing. Please make sure to support these authors. These books are out there, they're readily available and they're purchasable. So go out there and get them, preferably from your favorite independent bookstore or your library. But yeah. Oh, and also, if there are more great vendors on the vendor floor, so check that out sometime today. Any other final thoughts from anyone else?
No, thank you for having us, and thank you, Isis, for doing such an awesome job at moderation.
Oh, thank you. Okay,